6 weeks after we became a family of 5, we decided it was a good idea to embark on a camping adventure up the centre of Australia. And what an adventure it was! A 7-week trip in a tent with a newborn, a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old. We tackled some of Australia's most remote dirt tracks, stayed on active stations, visited mining towns, Uluru and made it all the way to Alice Springs. We drove a total of 6,800 kilometres and lived to tell the tale.
Give me your hands. What are they?
It's dirty.
They are a bit dirty.
Dirty.
Our flight back to Adelaide was only delayed by 1 hour, so it was much easier than the flight to Melbourne, and the kids loved every second of it. We continued on our trip and headed north about 230 kilometres from Adelaide to Nell Shabby, where we camped for the night. It was a fantastic campsite and the kids had fun being back in the dirt.
You're building a fire. Are these all your sticks?
After breakfast the next morning, we headed into the last major town that we'll see for a while, Port Pirie, and stocked up on groceries and had a play at the park and gave Piper a bottle, while I worked out where we were going to stay for the night. We knew we wanted to head to the Flinders Ranges area, but we didn't know where we were going to stay. We eventually stumbled on a camp called Mount Little Station, and we're so glad we did. It was incredible. It was on an active station and the camp areas were huge and entirely separated, so we felt like we were truly alone and we didn't have to worry about the kids bothering any neighbours. The place was so big that we actually had to drive to the bathroom block. It was a super windy night and the tent was flapping around and shuddering the whole night, so Adam and I didn't sleep very well, but the kids didn't stir. The next morning, we were up bright and early because there was so much to see and do. When we arrived, they gave us a full information pack about the station and told us we could go anywhere we wanted and suggested some cool things to see on the side. We quickly discovered that the maps they provided weren't particularly accurate, but it was fun trying to decipher them anyway. We saw heaps of cool things and explored the ruins of one of the original settlers' cottages. We took a 4-wheel drive track to a beautiful lookout.
Is it a bit bumpy?
We saw sheep, camels, kangaroos, emus, and we explored a dry riverbed and just generally had a fantastic day.
Piper, you need to change your nappy.
The next day was a typical example of how things can be amazing one day and the total opposite the next when you're travelling with kids. We did a short valley walk into a billabong in the morning, but Ari was cranky and didn't want to walk and grizzled the entire way. Then the furthest point from the camp, Logan decided that he needed to do a poop, and so we had to just rush back and Ari was super cranky. We were staying at the Flinders Ranges National Park that night, but we were out of good drinking water, so we drove an extra 15 minutes past the turnoff to a small town to get some bottled water, thinking they'd at least have a petrol station. But no, the town was a set of toilet blocks and a pub that didn't sell bottled water. So we left empty-handed and then backtracked 15 minutes. We thought it would be half an hour to the campsite from the turnoff, but boy were we wrong. There were no warnings on the Wiki Camp listings about the roads, so I hadn't investigated much, but this had some really steep sections, both uphill and downhill, some huge water-filled potholes at places where rivers would normally run through, and some crazy corrugations and dusty, slippery parts. There were some points when we thought there was no way we'd be able to get across that section, but it was impossible to turn around, so we just took it super slow and crawled on. The entire drive, Ari was grizzling for food, even though he'd had a bunch of food when we stopped in the town. What should have been a 45-minute trip from the town turned into a very sketchy 2 to 2.5 hour long trip. Having said that though, the drive was absolutely spectacular. Most of it was along the valley floor with ranges towering either side of us, and the sun was going down, so half the mountains were the warm yellow and the other half were in shadow. When we finally arrived, it was just getting dark and we unhitched, but then found that the spot we'd parked wasn't as good as it seemed. The ground wasn't level enough, so we had to reattach the car, move it, and then unhitch again. After a day of constant battles, we decided to have hot dogs in bread and canned peaches for dinner. It was such a cold night, and in the morning, the water in the drink bottles that were in our tent had chunks of ice in them. We made it to Marree, where we camped out the back of the pub, had showers and a pub meal and did the washing. We were up early and packed up and ready to hit the Unadilla track by 9 a.m. Our last stop was to get petrol, but when we arrived they had no unleaded left. The nearest petrol station was 75 kilometres the wrong way down the highway. We had just over half a tank and the gauge was telling us that we would last 220 kilometres. William Creek and the next petrol was 204 kilometres away. After confirming that William Creek did in fact have unleaded and we weren't going to be stranded once we got there, we aired down our tyres and hit the road. We stopped at an old salt lake and rail track. The kids loved getting out and exploring all the animal footprints, and we stopped at a few other places along the way, some sculptures and then the Lake Air lookout for lunch. Shoo flies! Go away, fly! William Creek has nothing but the pub, a petrol pump and a bunch of flat land for people to camp in. There is nothing for miles in any direction other than some stations. And we managed to get a flat tyre. Thankfully, it was just as we were coming into town, not on the open road. Are you fixing the tyre? It's a bit tight, is it? With a full tank of fuel, a fresh tyre and camp all set up, we wandered over to the pub for dinner.
You played on that big playground. You can run everywhere.
The staff at the pub was so friendly. They were absolutely amazing and the kids had so much fun.
That's alright. We're getting too many treats, sorry.
How did you guys find that part of the track on the way up?
Videoing your other half.
Oh, perfect. Oh, Mandarin. Lovely.
How old are you going to keep your
After being on the road for over 8 hours that day, it was so nice to sit down to a beautiful dinner, a lovely sunset, and then head to bed early. Next up, we discover the mines of Coober Pedy, we hit the real red dirt in the centre of Australia, visit Uluru, Kings Canyon and make it all the way to Alice Springs, where Ari falls asleep on a camel ride that he has been waiting weeks for.